Before we start, a quick quiz. 6 statements. All you have to do is decide true or false. Don't overthink it. Go with your gut. 1. You should drink at least 8 glasses of water a day. 2. Swimming less than an hour after eating is dangerous. 3. Cracking your knuckles causes arthritis. 4. Vitamin C prevents colds. 5. Cold drinks cause sore throats. And 6. Eating cherries and then drinking water is asking for trouble. Hold your answers. We'll come back to them. Right, the answers. All false. Every single one, with just a couple of caveats. The 8 glasses of water is a half-truth, a 1945 American nutrition recommendation that noted in the same document that most of the required fluid comes from food. Vigorous exercise shortly after eating might lead to some discomfort, but it's not going to leave you dead, floating face down in the water, as I was repeatedly warned as a child. The knuckle-cracking arthritis thing appears to be nonsense, though I strongly suspect its survival owes something to people who dislike the noise. Vitamin C preventing colds is not supported by evidence, except for people exposed to periods of extreme physical stress, marathon runners, soldiers in subarctic training. Cold drinks we'll come back to in a moment. And water and cherries do not invariably lead to diarrhea, no matter what Babka told you. Well, eating a huge number of cherries might have repercussions, but the water won't make a difference. I'd guess most of you knew at least one of those was wrong. But I'd also guess most of you believed at least one of them at some point in your life, and not because you're gullible. Because someone told you early, with confidence, and you had no particular reason to doubt them. The 8 glasses of water, the swimming, the knuckles, none of these arrived through personal observation. They arrived pre-packaged from a parent, a teacher, a doctor, a magazine. And once something arrives that way, it tends to stay. Such received wisdom is one way we end up believing things that aren't true. But it's not the only way. And to understand the others, I'd first like you to cast your minds back to episode 27 and Traja, zmrznutí muži, the 3 frozen men, Saints Pancrats, Servats and Bonifats, whose feast days fall on the 12th to the 14th of May, and who are said to bring the last cold snap of the year. As it turns out, there's a real meteorological explanation. As spring progresses, the landmass of Central Europe warms faster than the Atlantic. That temperature difference affects pressure systems in a way that tends to bring one final intrusion of cold Arctic air in mid-May, before summer properly establishes itself. Farmers in the Carpathian Basin noticed this pattern over generations. They didn't know about pressure systems, but they watched the weather carefully because their survival depended on it. They were right often enough that the observation survived, attached itself to 3 convenient saints' days as a memory aid, and got handed down as folklore. That's the brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Watching, noticing patterns, building a model of the world from accumulated observation, and passing it on. The problem is that that system can make mistakes. Watching cold snaps over decades, pretty reliable. Explaining why you have a sore throat on a Saturday morning, considerably less so. You spend 3 hours in a packed bar, you dance, you smoke, you drink lots of booze. At 2 a.m. you have 1 cold Coke and then roll home. The next morning you wake up with a sore throat. What caused it? If you're Slovak, it was the cold drink, obviously. It was cold, and in this part of the world, cold is suspicious. Babka told you, your mum and dad told you, heck, your biology teacher told you. And it was memorable, your last drink, and the only cold one. The bar full of people breathing on each other for 3 hours barely registers, and it definitely wasn't the smoking, the alcohol, or the lack of sleep. And every subsequent sore throat after a cold drink confirms what was already known, because you noticed those. The many times the cold drink had no effect simply don't register. Nothing happened. Nothing to file away. A more personal example. I came back from a trip to Britain at the beginning of April. I felt under the weather with a bit of a sore neck. There had recently been an outbreak of meningitis in the UK. And I found myself, a grown adult with a background in science, Googling meningitis symptoms. In my partial defence, there was just enough logical thread to make it feel like reasoning. UK, outbreak, sore neck, 3 dots. But being in the same country as an outbreak is not a meaningful personal risk factor in the same way as, say, being in a metal tube in April in close proximity to a bunch of other people. But it felt like joining up what was genuinely there, rather than a leap in the dark. That's the seductive bit. This kind of thinking rarely feels like a leap. It feels like paying attention. And then there's the kind that feels like being a smart consumer. While I was in the UK on the same trip, I thought I'd save myself some money by buying some generic medicines from the pound shop. 48 200mg ibuprofen tablets? Bargain. A packet of cheap decongestants? Yes, please. That'll save some money on Paralene grip when I get back to Slovakia. It was only when I was doing research for the last video that I thought to properly check the evidence base of the active ingredient. It turns out that while pseudoephedrine is quite an effective decongestant, the evidence for what I'd bought, phenylephrine, is a lot thinner. And I could not swear that I didn't take one of those tablets, perhaps just as my congestion was clearing away, and then credit it with at least part of the recovery. And while I'm confessing, I take a combined vitamin C, zinc and vitamin D pill quite regularly during the winter months, superstitiously almost, despite knowing full well that vitamin C is unlikely to prevent a cold. It might shorten it. And what's the harm, eh? It's a kind of Pascal's wager approach to dietary supplements. So, transferring authority from where it belongs, my urologist from last episode, if you remember, to where it doesn't, his recommendation for Prostinal Forte. Received wisdom we never question. The habit of crediting the most recent and vivid cause. Noticing the hits and forgetting the misses. Connecting the dots and coming up with a picture of a deadly disease. Poorly evaluating risk. Mixing up your active ingredients. Ignoring the fact that time generally heals. And the quiet superstitions we maintain even when we know better. This is our operating system. And it allowed our ancestors to survive in a world where fast, pattern-based decisions were more useful than slow, evidence-based ones. The problem is that the world changed faster than the OS updated, and some environments make it glitch more than others. Before we get to that, I want to name one more cognitive tendency, one I haven't mentioned yet, and one I'm going to try particularly hard not to commit for the rest of the episode. Humans are powerfully drawn to simple stories, single causes, identifiable villains. This happened because of that person, or that group, or that decision. The messier truth, that most things have multiple causes, long histories, and no single villain, is harder to grasp and considerably less satisfying. Hold that thought. The important thing is that none of this is uniquely Slovak. Britons do it too, Americans do it, I do it. The question isn't why Slovaks have a different operating system to other humans. Obviously they don't. The question is why the same operating system produces somewhat different outputs in different environments. A 2020 Globsec report ranks Slovakia as the most conspiracy-prone country in the region, and it's well ahead of Britain in that regard. And there are, I think, genuine reasons for this. Not character flaws, not inherent stupidity, a specific experience of history that produced a specific set of conditions in which the operating system has to function. Clearly, the reasons will be multiple and intertwined, and this is not pharmacology anymore, so there is inevitably more of an element of speculation. New systems rarely wipe the slate clean. They absorb what was already there, repackage it, and let older ideas survive in new institutional clothing. You'll remember from the Easter episode that many Slovak Easter traditions are quite obviously not Christian in origin. The water, the eggs, the whipping. These are remnants of older spring fertility rituals. Christianity did not eliminate them, it absorbed them, reinterpreted them, and allowed them to continue under a new banner. Meet people where they are, incorporate what they already believe, and the new framework feels like continuity rather than rupture. Something similar happened with ideas about health. As we saw in the Put Some Socks On episode, many traditional explanations of illness remain remarkably resilient in Slovakia. The notion that cold itself can make you ill, the idea that the body must be protected from drafts. These ideas long predate modern medicine. And then came the 20th century. Soviet medicine was, in principle, a modern scientific project, but it did not arrive in an empty space. Alongside genuine medical advances, it also preserved and institutionalized a range of older practices, sanatoria, climate therapies, and hardening treatments. The result was a grey zone in which evidence-based medicine and inherited practice sat side by side, often with the same institutional authority. And that matters. Religion can live with symbolism. Medicine is supposed to work. As we saw in the Lecaren episode, when older beliefs and evidence-based medicine sit on the shelf side by side for generations, there is friction. It becomes genuinely harder to distinguish between ideas that have survived because they are true and ideas that have survived because they are familiar. In the same Lecaren episode, I said that socialism had eroded trust in official institutions. But which institutions exactly? The stereotype is that Slovaks distrust politicians. But let's be honest, this is hardly unique. Neither Slovaks nor British people believe much of what politicians say. Neither has much faith in Parliament either, though this was a little higher in the UK in 2020, according to the European Social Survey. What is strikingly different in that same survey is Slovakia's markedly lower trust in the police, and more particularly in the legal system. Globsec backs this up with a fairly depressing stat. Only 22% of Slovaks trusted their courts and judiciary in 2020. Slovaks also display a more generalised distrust. When asked, would you say that most people can be trusted, or that you can't be too careful in dealing with people? Slovakia scores significantly lower than the UK. But if you don't trust strangers, and you don't trust institutions, you still have to trust somebody. Human beings aren't built to operate without trust altogether. One possible consequence is that more weight gets placed on personal authority. The doctor whose word is law, the teacher whose confidence is total, the friend who knows someone. Direct experience and trusted individuals begin to compete with institutions as sources of truth. This is exacerbated by an educational system which places a great deal of emphasis on learning things by heart, rather than asking why and how do we know that? The focus of recent research and calls for education reform in Slovakia is not so much on what students know, but on how they learn to judge claims. Because when you are only taught what to think, you are more vulnerable to whoever holds the loudest microphone when the establishment fails you. Raining. Economic and social factors also play a role. If all the wealth and high-paying jobs get sucked into the big cities, this can lead to marginalisation of rural and small-town communities, breeding alienation, frustration and anger. In Britain, there has traditionally been resentment in the north towards bloody southerners, and especially towards London. But this anti-capital feeling seems much more intense in the east of Slovakia, and presumably in other rural areas. Those virtue-signalling multi-culti Slniečkári sipping their matcha soy lattes in the cafes of Bratislava. What do they know about life? And then we have the čo už effect, or more poetically, muži, zjedzte si ma. Come flies, eat me. The attitudinal equivalent of lying down in the driveway and letting the world roll over you. According to the Globsec report, 85% of Slovaks believe that oligarchs and financial groups have significant influence over government. This feeling of helplessness is further underscored by a perception among 68% of Slovaks, the highest in the region, that their country has always been oppressed and they were never able to control their own path. And the overwhelming majority of people who believe that also believe that non-governmental organisations are a secret instrument of foreign powers and interests, and that anti-government protests were controlled and paid for by foreign actors such as George Soros. When people feel left behind and powerless, simple stories about hidden enemies become more attractive. Nice. A wide range of explanatory frameworks considered culturally legitimate. Distrust of institutions but deference to individuals. An education system that focuses more on the what than the how and the why. Alienation of huge swathes of the country. Deeply ingrained fatalism. And a history of being under someone else's yoke. The Hungarian crown, the Habsburg Empire, the Soviets. That combination doesn't automatically produce conspiracy thinking, but it creates conditions in which the right kind of voice outside the establishment, fluent in the language of skepticism, offering a simple story, can find an audience that official sources cannot easily reclaim. Two examples, 2 times, 2 countries. In February 1991, a former BBC sports presenter and Coventry City goalkeeper named David Icke appeared on Wogan, the country's most watched chat show, in a turquoise shell suit, shushjaki. He announced that he was a son of the Godhead and that the world would soon be devastated by tidal waves and earthquakes. Amid laughter from the audience, Icke said that laughter was the best way to remove negativity. Wogan replied of the audience, "But they're laughing at you, they're not laughing with you." Icke has spent the 3 decades since developing an elaborate theory in which the world's elite, the British royal family, various American dynasties, assorted financiers, are in fact shape-shifting reptilian human-alien hybrids who manipulate events to keep humans in a state of fear, so that an interdimensional race of fully reptilian beings can feed off the resulting negative energy. If some of this sounds familiar to Slovak viewers, it should. Meet Soňa Peková, a Czech molecular biologist who came to prominence during COVID with heterodox claims about the virus having been created in a laboratory. Since then, her worldview has extended considerably. In a video from September 2023, she publicly argued that we live in a 3-dimensional hologram and that humanity is not controlled by human authorities, but by entities she describes as dragons and reptiles. In January 2024, Kotlár, a Slovak doctor, politician and avowed anti-vaxxer, was appointed by the Slovak government as a special commissioner to investigate the state's handling of the COVID pandemic. Long after Peková's more esoteric views were made public, Kotlár commissioned her to produce a molecular analysis, and Peková voluntarily produced this in the form of a court expert report. Same belief structure as Icke? Icke became a national joke. Peková was cited as a court expert for the Slovak government. In fairness, as vivid as Icke's interview is in my memory, it was 35 years ago. God, I'm old. But would Britain still laugh Icke quite so readily out of town today as it did in 1991? When YouGov carried out a comparable survey to the GlobSec one, also in 2020, only 28% of people in the UK believed the conspiracy theory that the world is run by a single secret group, less than half of the figure in Slovakia. And only 12% of Britons believed that the United States government was even involved in the 9/11 attacks, compared to 45% of Slovaks in the GlobSec report who believed that it planned and conducted them. But a lot can change in 6 years, and I wouldn't be quite so confident of the UK's hard-headed empiricism these days. Last episode, one commenter responded to my claim that socialism had damaged Slovaks' trust in institutions. You can say exactly the same of capitalism, where Big Pharma lobbies and bribes politicians to their benefit. And that's absolutely true. Regulatory capture isn't a communist invention. It's what happens when institutions are captured by interests other than the public good. And capitalism is perfectly capable of getting there by its own route, as we saw with Boiron and Sanofi last time. I would maintain that Slovakia got there sooner, but it's starting to look a lot like the rest of the world is trying very hard to catch up. The OS updates are lagging just about everywhere. The institutional gatekeepers that kept Icke on the fringe in 1991 have spent the intervening 35 years losing their own public trust. Blair and the non-existent weapons of mass destruction, financial crashes, the legacy of Thatcher's privatisations, Boris and COVID, BBC scandals, and social media has enabled figures who would once have remained firmly fringe to build direct audiences of millions. And now, Nigel Farage, who is many things but not stupid, looks at a population that has been through all of that and hands them a single cause. More on that in a future episode. If you've enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and please get involved in the comments. I'm James Bloor, and this has been The Bloorcast. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.